that's where I met him when I attended a connectionism summer school in the late 90s at Oxford, which Michael was teaching on. Since 2002, you've been at Birkbeck, first of all within the Centre for Brain and Cognitive Development, where you set up the Developmental Neurocognition Lab. But since 2010, you've been very involved with the Centre for Education and Neuroscience, a collaborative centre between Birkbeck, the Institute of Education, the UCL Institute of Education, and UCL, which you lead. And I think you've researched many different areas of development, and you've been a great proponent of a multi-methods, multidisciplinary approach. And now I think your work is very importantly engaged in bringing neuroscience to education practice. And today you're going to be talking to us about a project where you've been looking at whether multilingualism can enhance teenage cognition and their educational outcomes. So thank you very much for coming to speak to us.
Super, thanks so much. It has been a pleasure to come visit you today. So I'm going to be talking about multilingualism, but some of you guys might know more about this than me. So feel free at any point to snigger behind your hand or go, say, these kind of noises, that's fine. I'm going to be talking quite a lot about the work of Roberto Filippi and also Rasheen Perry. And, I've shamelessly stolen some of Roberto's slides. So any of the rubbish slides are his and any of the good slides are mine. And although I'm going to end up talking about a quite focused study, which I'm going to admit is the write-up is not yet finished. Because I keep going back to Rasheen, who's running the analyses, and asking for more analyses. And I think at the moment she's not talking to me. Because I said, could you run another 360 structural equation models? So I'm going to take you on a journey to get there. So it's going to have a kind of bit of narrative structure to today's talk, rather than just showing you introduction, methods, results. Oh, it moved on its own accord. Very good. Okay, so these are Roberto's slides. Nice, friendly introduction. You guys know a lot of this stuff, the importance of multilingualism. So do I?
Yeah, just at the bottom there.
Oh, half the world's population. Oh, it's doing all sorts of things. This is going to be an adventure. All right. Oh, okay. It wasn't when I prepared it, but then it's changed computers and formats. Anyway, okay, so multilingualism important in the world, important in the EU, important in the UK, and well, there we go. Just looking at UK schools, 20% of the pupils in UK schools, English is their second language in certain regions. So in London, 44% of schools in London are multilingual, and that's across all of the educational range. So for education, hugely salient issue. Now, in this area, nevertheless, you would have thought there'd been a lot of research, not least in your centre. There's still quite a lot of misconceptions about multilingualism and its impact on education. These are examples of alarming things that have been said to Roberto when he's been out talking to teachers, such as, so this is from a parent, teachers strongly discouraged me and my husband to speak 2 languages at home. My child's teacher said that raising my child bilingual will significantly delay his linguistic and cognitive development. And this from an educator, multilingual pupils take more than 7 years to achieve the same level of school attainment as English monolinguals, even when raised in high socioeconomic wealthy environments. So kind of scare things that multilingualism may have a negative impact on education. And then just an example of the kind of inquiry, gets an email that was sent actually from one of my former students saying, So it's quite a puzzle. And if any of you know the answer to this. So my wife and I have a 4-month-old daughter. We are currently living in China. My wife speaks to the baby in Mandarin Chinese, her mother tongue, and to me in English. I'd like my daughter to develop native pronunciation in both English and French, which she speaks. It's almost certain she will acquire native Mandarin through her mother. What is the best way I should go about making sure she can speak English and French? Like alternate days, to alternate contexts. Well, should I do one language and later another? Like, how's it going to be done? So lots of relevant questions in this area, which are educational relevance. So we'll go back and do a sort of brief history of bilingualism, just to say in educational terms, it starts off being the baddie. So this is sort of 19th century, earlier 20th century. Monolingual children outperform bilinguals on a range of IQ measures. But if you have a look in any detail at that study, the bilinguals were drawn from low SES background, monolinguals from high SES backgrounds, kind of confounded. And then in the 1960s, work by Peel and Lambert tried to correct for the socioeconomic status confound, and then found that in cognitive tasks, the bilinguals are doing better. So odds good. And then after that, more recently, not just good, very good. Now we're into bilinguals and monolinguals outperform monolinguals on a range of executive function tasks. This is the work, particularly position advanced by Ellen Bialystock, who has several articles on that. And her position is, it's all about the relationship between language and attention. She advances what is often called the bilingual advantage hypothesis. And it's sort of the idea you've got to control 2 languages, and that's kind of working your brain somehow, particularly the control processes. And so you kind of build up your cognitive control muscles, and then that helps you in other domains. And it's a brain training thing. It's a cure-all. It may even protect your brain against neurodegeneration later on. I should just throw in a word here. I'm used to working in the area of neurodevelopmental conditions. I wasn't quite in the camera there. I'm going to shuffle a bit. And also in the area of neurodiversity. And I'm aware that choice of words and language is important. And I think this area is a little bit unreconstructed, because advantage is it's a very normative term. You all right with that?
Yeah, we've just got the slides moving around, so I put something in the chat for you to ask. So people watching online are seeing different slides.
Oh,
Just
well, that's fine.
I'll just take control here.
Yeah.
And then
I think I did have a message that someone else had taken control, which is exciting.
you're
If they want to
take back control.
take over the talk, that's all good. I'd be interested to watch my own talk. Okay, so I think there's still issues for this field about sorting out the language. Clearly in education, and I'm going to be talking about SATs results, GCSE results, this is an area which seems pretty normative. Everyone seems to agree that if you get higher GCSE grades, that's better. So I think in the area of education, I think it's okay to talk about advantages. But when we're talking about the area of cognition, I'm not so sure that we want kind of normative language there. We might need to talk about differences. But then if I'm doing an analysis with cognition and education in, it's going to get quite mind-stretching for me to talk about differences on this part of the instruction equation model, but advantages on that part. I don't know. So I think there's still some thinking through in this field about our terminology. Okay. All right. So personal journey here. So and this is where I did find an embarrassing photo. Maybe it's too small for you to see, but this is the olden days. This is going back to time I was doing my PhD, and you can see me. I'm standing behind the guy with the dyed orange hair. Yeah, I think this is just before he went off to work on MTV in an early reality TV program, and I had sort of big dark hair, looks good, but quite slim. And Denis is there, only to be recognised by that T-shirt, even by himself, from that picture. Anyway, so this is back in Oxford days. I was doing my PhD in the area of bilingualism, and this was quite from a cognitive perspective, interested in representation issues. So is there like one store of your vocabulary, or are there two separate stores, and what are the control mechanisms? How does that impact with acquisition? So in the center there was the main paper, language switching costs in bilingual visual word recognition, that came out of my thesis. Still fortunately being cited today. So yes, focused on that from quite a cognitive language development perspective, not really reaching outside to think about cognition outside of language. But I have to admit, my experience working in the area of bilingualism wasn't super positive for what I was interested in at that time. I found research in that area really quite prone to publication bias, and very linked to educational, political, cultural agendas. So this was, multiculturalism was, the way forward. They were only going to publish findings where, whatever you're looking at, bilinguals are doing better. If you find no difference, or if you found the monolinguals are doing better, not interested, take that elsewhere. And I mean, obviously, as we're talking about today, multilingualism has many wider implications, but I don't think I was ready for that at that time. I just wanted to run my experiments, right? Publish my papers. So I kind of walked away from that field, and I switched to focus on neurodevelopmental conditions, thinking about developmental theory using computational modeling, as Daisy mentioned. And then later on, I kind of actually then moved back into educational neuroscience, thinking that now I've become a bit more interested in translation and kind of wider implications. So we'll see a bit of that journey throughout this talk. I think a bunch of this will be obvious to you guys because you work in this area. So, who is a bilingual or multilingual? Obviously, there are different categories depending on when you acquire the different languages, simultaneous acquisition, early acquisition, late acquisition of second or more languages, and then thinking about receptive bilingualism, so you can comprehend but you can't produce, bimodal bilingualism between oral language and sign language and so forth. So lots of distinctions going on. I remember that was another reason why I moved away from the area of bilingualism, was it was really theoretically messy. And the papers at that point were just like, well, let's just have two groups. One's bilingual and one's monolingual, and then we'll compare them on some dependent variable. But actually, like, multilingualism is like a multidimensional space where you can really just identify the kind of dimensions, and then people are going to vary on their position. So things like age of acquisition of the languages, the current dominance, the modality. Are we looking at written or spoken? Are we looking at comprehension or production? What language sets? Are they similar to each other? Are they very different? Is it 2 languages, 3 languages, 4 languages? And if you look in reality, no one just has exactly 1 language or exactly 2 languages. You have bits of others, right? You may have a sort of semi-functional 3rd language, maybe. And then, a dimension such as, what is your context of usage? Are you often switching between them? Are you just in this language in this context, that language in that context? Or maybe it's a content, So I've got colleagues. So Denis is a good example. Denis Marichal, French, English, bilingual, completely fluent in those. But English, all of his academic research is in English. So there's no way he could go and give an academic talk in French, even though he could chat with someone completely fluently in French. So that's kind of the effect of content. And then various issues of sort of level of interference between the languages, the attrition effects of unused languages, competition between the languages, and your ability to control that interference. So I about as far as I got before I walked away with some conception of this relationship I put there on that graph as being kind of a non-linear one. So on the y-axis there is your ability to access and fluently use a language and control its usage. And L1, we're really good at that. We're really fluent and so forth. And then you can fit in an L2, and then you're pretty good at that and pretty fluent. And you can control that really well. And then maybe you can stack in an L3 as well. And then you get increasing sort of interference effects and inability to control. So you'll often find you have holiday languages where you know half a dozen words or 20 words or something. And then you go on holiday and you go, right, I'm in Spain, and you go in to order a beer and an Italian word comes out because that's another one of your holiday languages, right? So it's the context is then more important than your ability to control it. And you get a lot of interference effects between these kind of ill-used or less used. But the point about this is it's sort of a dynamic system. So if you acquire things early, you can probably alter that curve so that it's higher up on both L1 and L2. And with practice, you can shift that curve as well. Yeah, so the more time you just spend using language, the more total amount of accessibility, fluency, and control you'll get. But the point is, there's no static system. Like any individual at any one time is in a point in that multidimensional space, and they will change depending on if they stop using a certain language in a certain modality, and you'll get these kind of language decay, attrition effects that often depend on the similarity between the language pairs. And so, man, it's messy, yeah, to do experimental work in this area. So, and I haven't even going back to the field, I don't really see that level of complexity embraced in the literature. It would strike me that if you've got a dependent variable as your output, and you're really interested in this area, you should be building regression models with all of those as predictors, and in order to understand multilingualism in this more complex dimensional framework. So theoretical aspects, at least the work when I started out, often it was just borrowing models from monolingual acquisition. Rather few properly thought out psycholinguistic models applied to multilingual processing. David Green's inhibitory control model is one of the early and still influential models. So, got it. That's his model. So it's got a bilingual lexicosemantic system, and then you have some kind of language task schema. Which language should I be using right now, given the context? And then that makes contact with your executive function, you know, in supervisory attentional systems. So you've got this kind of general control system that's increasing the activation of certain areas and inhibiting other ones, and then enabling you to use context to switch between them. I mean, it's a bilingual system. We'd expect all of these to be just highly practiced versions of the kind of control that you have it within a single language, where you would have conversational registers, a different set of vocabulary items you'd use talking to your friends versus talking to your boss, and you're using sort of top-down control to select vocabulary items. But obviously that doesn't work on pronunciation unless you talk kind of street with your mates and very posh with your boss. I guess then you have to control phonology as well. Okay, this is Roberto's slide. He has, you know, from this model a bunch of predictions about non-selective access, inhibitory control, so forth. Down the bottom was where I did my kind of work looking at language switching costs, forcing people to switch between their languages and seeing their ability to do that. Some other ones, but this is really where things get interesting. Possible cognitive advantages. The idea in the inhibitory control model is that bilinguals may show advantages in tasks that require non-verbal inhibitory control. And that is really the original basis for the bilingual advantage. which in cognitive training terms is suggesting that you might get far transfer of your experiences using your languages to non-verbal cognition beyond the domain of language. Okay, I wasn't bothered about that though. I was focused on this. So developmental theory, neuroconstructivism, thinking about how to link cognitive development with brain development, working on neurodevelopmental conditions. So that was kind of passing me by. That was until Roberto turned up, a very charming Italian man, and very multilingual. And he said, I really want to do a PhD in bilingualism. And I said, yeah, okay, but I'm not interested in doing that. I'll be your second supervisor, and you go off and do it with the first supervisor. But then, unfortunately, circumstances meant that the first supervisor had to drop out. And then I found myself, oh no, I've been sucked back into bilingualism. So most of the subsequent work you're going to see is as a consequence of that. It's like doing a Simon task, which I'll explain in a moment. Okay, so this is a sort of experiment we began to do with Roberto. So this was a control of verbal interference. So this is a task where you're read sentences. So you're going to have two sentences coming into your ears, one to the left and one into the right. And so in this case, one of them is a female voice. The frog is hit by the cow. And in the other is like an Italian one, so it'll be a male voice. Il pappagallo morde il toro, which is, the parrot is doing something nasty to a bull, apparently. And your goal here is you've got to ignore one of those, just focus on the other one, and press a button for which animal is doing the bad action. Okay, and it's left or right. And what we were interested in here was, what is your ability to ignore the language that you're supposed to, the irrelevant one. Now we're going to be looking at either Italian monolinguals or very proficient Italian English bilinguals. Always what you're doing is going to be focusing on the Italian language, but you might get another voice which is also in Italian distracting you, or in English distracting you. Now, hopefully, if you're a monolingual and there's an English distracting you, that should be easy, because I don't even understand that language, so it should be easy to disregard. And the other thing we manipulated was the complexity of the sentences. Either they're easy ones, subject, verb, object, or non-canonical word order, so passive voice. Yes. And when we did that, what did we find? Well, when the sentences are easy, no real differences. You're all pretty accurate, and you can ignore the distractor language. But for the non-canonical sentences, which are a little bit harder to process, the monolinguals were doing worse at ignoring the distracting language. It looks like the bilinguals had better ability to control their attention and ignore the task irrelevant language. So that was one study we did looking at comprehension, and then we had a look at production. And this is a task where it's a switching task. Well, I did this experiment, a version of it during my PhD, but as with several experiments during my PhD, I completely messed it up. So I said to Roberto, go back and do this properly. So it would be like you'd see words presented on a color background, and if it's on a blue background, it's an Italian word, just say it out loud. It's on a red background, it's an English word, say it in English, and it's going to switch. Yes. And the key thing we're interested in here is if there's a switch of language, does that slow you down? Yes. It's like the gears graunching as you like swap between the languages. And then we were interested in your sort of how strong are your two, what's the dominance between your two languages? Is that going to affect the switch cost? And then the particular words, we were messing with them. So this is a case where there's a word that exists in both languages and it means the same thing, or cane in English, carne in Italian. These are non-cognate homographs. Is that going to mess with you? Versus words that could only exist. So vecchio and yacht, these are words that only exist in one language, and they're obvious by their orthotactics about what language they come from. And when we did this, we found this pattern of asymmetric switch costs. It's actually harder to switch from your weaker language into your stronger language. The reasoning being that you've really had to inhibit your stronger language to allow access to your weaker language, and it takes you longer to release that inhibition to switch languages. But it does depend on the particular word. So there's a sort of top-down control issue, and then there's a bottom-up lexical access issue, and the two interact to predict the switch cost. But the switch cost also depends on your level of dominance, the relative level of so we've got some correlation there showing that. So it's all good, solid psycholinguistics. Roberto was interested. He said, I want to do behavioral experiments, but can we do some of that brain imaging stuff as well? So we got a collaboration going with Kathy Price at the Functional Imaging Lab. Now, I don't know what happens when I click this, if anything. Ooh, it's Roberto's slide. Wait for the good bits coming. The good bits coming here. That's the good bit, that flowery bit at the bottom. Because it turns out when we had a look, we either did a functional study or a structural study. Where did we find differences? Go to the next slide. There we go. Differences that correlate with control of interference between languages. We picked up regions in the cerebellum. Now, if you're a psychologist, you know nothing about the cerebellum. No one ever tells you about the cerebellum. It's only the cortex that matters. Which is slightly disappointing that if you go into your kind of neuroscience, and I did write a book recently on how the brain works, that it turns out that 80% of the brain's neurons are in the cerebellum. And the cortex is a little bit kind of afterthought due to the sensory motor. So cerebellum is a sort of, it's an increasing amount of research in it. It's basically part of motor automaticity. So this looks like a control issue on automatic control of articulators and the motor plans relevant to each language. And I think Roberto has like a lovely brain plasticity slide, just demonstrating if you work a region of the brain enough, you will find structural differences in it. I'm not a big fan of structural brain imaging. I think, with respect to behavior, most of the differences you see don't have much effect on brain structure. And functional is where you want to go, but functional is really noisy. So brain imaging isn't perfect, but really useful. This touches a little bit. There is a bunch of research on bilingualism and functional imaging. This is how they thought the language system worked back in the 19th century. So Wernicke's area, Broca's area, and so forth. And there'll be zillions of studies on this. And nowadays, meta-analyses of studies and meta-analyses of studies about this kind of stuff. But as I understand it, broadly, the more balanced you are as a bilingual, the more similar areas you will be using. So it's kind of common brain areas to use your two languages. And that's because the brain is fairly literal. It does sensory stuff. It does motor stuff. The sensory stuff for language is all going to be building phonological representations around primary auditory cortex and connecting them to semantic representations. The articulation is coming from motor strips. The kind of control, the motor aspect, the sensory aspect is going to be highly similar. And where you see differences, they will mainly come from age of acquisition and level of automaticity. There's a few differences depending on language types. You can see different brain imaging patterns if you're looking at an English brain versus a Chinese brain, and modality issues. So there's some sort of specific areas for sign languages and so forth. So I'm not going to really go into that today, as important as it is. Okay, I'm going to allow time to pass. I'm going to get, not as slim as I was in that original picture. And what happens? Well, some weird stuff starts to go on in the bilingual literature about, moves away from this psycholinguistic approach, much more into the bilingual advantage. And the fights seem to be getting much dirtier. I don't know what's going on in that area. So this is a paper out this year, a commentary by Ellen Bialystok. And in this paper, she looks back in a chapter she wrote in a book in 1992, which actually I read that book at the time I was doing my PhD, right? And that was a kind of psycholinguistics book about mental representations and processes of control and switching and that kind of stuff. And she basically goes back and says, well, I wrote in that chapter 30 years ago, I was right. That's the point of that commentary. So I review 3 claims I made there, namely that the effects of bilingual experience extend into non-verbal domains, and that these effects were continuous in nature and not categorical, and that selective attention was key to explaining cognitive change in bilinguals. So very ardent restatement of that. I have to say that, as I understand the Bialystok position, it kind of shifts. It was about executive functions. Now she's saying it's not about executive functions and bar transfer. It's about domain general selective attention. And you're only going to see it in certain individuals who are developing those skills or in certain tasks. It's a little bit defensive. It's supported by some kind of, to me, sort of weird studies that are showing bilingual advantages in like 12-month-old infants before they are bilinguals. And that's a paper saying it's on selective attention in infancy. We'll come back to this, but that kind of paper just smacks of confound. There's something different about bilingual families, like one parent, one language, in the way that you're interacting with that baby that's having these effects. It can't be the language because they don't even speak the language, right? And they've got their chronological development is like universal at that point. They probably don't know that there are 2 languages. Anyway, on the other side, so this is a paper that's still in press in Psychological Review, a bunch of people who are skeptical, to say the least, of the bilingual advantage. So some of them have said things like, there's these confounds with socioeconomic status, and if you try and correct for those, the bilingual advantage goes away. And other ones saying these are kind of dodgy measures, and then meta-analyses. Some meta-analyses find it, and some meta-analyses don't. This one with Ken Papp, they try and make sure they're using robust executive function measures with latent factors, and combine laboratory measures and self-rating measures. And basically they find, what do they say? The results provide no evidence for a bilingual advantage on executive function performance. And then they say something from the text. It's down in the gutter, right? That in the meta-analyses, the significant moderators about whether a study shows an effect or not is either if the study is low quality or if it comes out of Ellen Bialystok's lab. It's like, whoa, what happened while I was away, people? Damn. Okay, so that's going on. And while that's going on, these guys, getting quite mean with each other. I've been doing educational neuroscience, right? So I've been moving away from sort of theory and thinking more about translation. So educational neuroscience, part of the science of learning, really got going. I mean, it was triggered really by the advances in brain imaging to be able to understand how brains work in vivo in kind of behaviors relevant, in this case, to education. And yes, psychology and education have been interacting for 150 years or so forth, but now let's join the party. Let's add neuroscience about mechanisms of learning in the brain. Let's add machine learning as we understand different ways that mechanisms can learn, and therefore what are the biological particulars, the way that we learn, different from how you could learn. So this kind of, you begin to realize that a bunch of different things about how the human brain works are arbitrary because of evolution and biology. So, less used L2 vocabulary, you're going to forget that stuff, right? if you're scared of spiders, you're never going to forget that. They're just memories. Why would they have different forgetting curves? Well, it's a big biological reason. They're different brain structures. One's cortical, one's in the amygdala. I mean, you know, it's a biological story, right? And all of that presumably is going to be relevant to education. Now, I've written some books on this stuff and edited books. This is one of the ones published in 2020. Again, the overall focus is on translating principles from the science of learning into educational practice. But as part of this book, I wanted to get together some guys who were working in the cognitive enhancement area or cognitive training. And these are various kind of proposals that activities you can do might improve your cognitive ability or intelligence. And there are a bunch of these out there. Learn to play a musical instrument, that'll make you cleverer. Learn to play chess. It's working memory training as a representative of like cognitive training, brain training, mindfulness training, action video game playing, aerobic fitness. So there are a bunch of these guys out there. I call it a magazine of magic bullets to improve general cognition. These are kind of things that you often see in schools being advocated as, oh, this will help your kids. And then in that context, I begin to think, well, is multilingualism one of these? Is it like being offered as a sort of magic bullet that's going to do more than giving you 2 languages to interact with a whole bunch more people and literature and culture and so forth? And this is the difficulty in this area, that it seems, I don't know if you know about near and far transfer. So these are training effects. A near training effect says you get better on the tasks you're training on, or other tasks that are very similar. Far transfer is when very different abilities also increase as a consequence. Yes. And there's increasing evidence from meta-analysis of these type of cognitive training approaches that far transfer isn't a thing in cognitive training. Pretty much you just improve on what you're training. Yes. And all of these magic bullet things. So there's one of the papers by Giovanna Sala and Fernand Gobet from probably meta-analyses. Negative evidence from chess, music, and working memory training. You practice those, you get better at them, but you don't find benefits further afield. Something slightly weird going on in psychology that someone should get to the bottom of at some point. We've been pursuing all of these training things for decades, but actually we knew in like there's a paper in like 1901 that we knew from the time of Thorndike that you don't get far transfer. So it's not obvious why we spent 100 years doing something that we knew didn't work. Anyway, the neuroscience of this says, why is this? Well, the brain uses content-specific circuits. Yes. Might be a better way to design a machine learning system. Might not have to do that, but in the brain, you store knowledge in the strength of the connections between the neurons. So the content is built into the structure. So you have to have content-specific circuits, which is why you don't get far transfer. Unless you're improving the whole system on a sort of biological basis by having a good night's sleep, or making sure you're not hungry or not stressed, or that you're aerobically fit, or, you know, these kind of things. If you think of multilingualism coming from that direction, it does seem it's going to be a little bit unlikely that it's going to produce a general cognitive benefit, at least just by virtue of the cognitive control demands of using 2 languages. Is a puzzle. I haven't got to the bottom of it. In fact, I was on the train on the way to Reading. I was having exactly your IT problems because Giovanni Sala was giving a seminar in my department back in London on this stuff. And I could only dial into it on my phone, but I wanted to shout out this question. But I couldn't get the comments to work because I was accessing it as an extra. Okay. But anyway, so the puzzle is, if there is no far transfer, if you only ever improve on what you train on, how come education improves general cognition? good meta-analytical evidence that for every additional year you spend in full-time education, your IQ goes up between 1 and 5 IQ points, depending on the studies you look at. So education seems to be able to give you a general improvement, but any specific piece of cognitive training only seems to improve what you practice on. So bit of a paradox there. Hopefully I'll try and resolve that by the end. How am I doing for time? Okay, 5 minutes.
No, not 5 minutes, 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
People will leave.
Something like that. Okay. Roberto, meantime, I'm doing this educational neuroscience stuff. Roberto is building his own lab, going grey guns. The Multac lab. And the kind of work he's doing, so he's beginning to look at the interaction between bilingualism and socioeconomic status. So this is one study where he's contrasting high-low SES, bilingual monolinguals, where SES is measured by parental occupation, parental education, occupation, household income. And this is an executive function task. So Roberto is going after this bilingual advantage. I think he really believes in it. Believed in it. I don't know. So he's quite, now he's doing something called the Simon task. So this is a fairly simple, often used executive function task. So let's say I've shown a screen, and if a blue square appears on the screen, I have to press button with my right hand. And if a red square appears on the screen, I have to press button with my left hand. That seems like an easy task, right? Blue square, but red square, but the squares might appear on the same side as the hand you're supposed to press it, or on the opposite side. And actually it gets quite hard. If the blue square appears over here, you want to press the same side button, but you have to inhibit that and press with the, but it keeps switching, right? So there's this, what's called the congruent trials will be the ones where the square appears on the same side, the incongruent on the opposite. And the assumption is you've got to exert some kind of executive function, top-down control to resolve the competition on the incongruent trials. And so what Roberto is showing here, low socioeconomic status bilinguals outperformed low SES monolinguals in the Simon task, suggesting maybe there's something about bilingualism is buffering the effects of low SES. So generally the high SES individuals were doing better on this task than the low SES, but bilingualism appears to interact with it. And then Roberto was off doing some enormous cross-sectional developmental trajectory with this task and other measures from 7 years of age to 80 years of age. So now we're looking at the Simon task, and I think what you're looking at is you can see, okay, so this is response time, and then the higher ones here are incongruent trials, and the lower ones you do better on the congruent, so same side. And then we're comparing monolinguals and multilinguals. Now, what we're seeing is, yeah, everyone finds it harder to do the incongruent trials. There are clear developmental changes that you're getting better with age to young adulthood, and then middle adulthood you're getting worse, and old adulthood you're getting worse still. But there's no real modulation there of monolinguals versus multilinguals. That's on response time, and this is on proportion correct. So same kind of thing. So Roberto's just spent, I know, it was a 3-year Leverhulme grant collecting all these data, and then he comes out of it going, there's no bilingual advantage, and there's no protective effect with older, and then he probably goes back to that Ellen Bialystock paper and finds out that she now says, oh, you wouldn't want to use that task, just having spent 3 years pursuing it. I mean, it was the Simon task was where Ellen first reported these kind of effects. Okay, so now I'm broadly not interacting with Roberto during this, but the occasional, we do have the occasional interaction. So I consulted on the writing of this paper, which was one of his students, Lucy Kerrigan, and she was doing, where are we, an attentional blink test, sort of change blindness thing. So it's alternating, seeing this thing where one photo, two photos, back, and it's like there's something different between these two photos. Can you see it or not? Okay. Now, I don't know what those are the two phrases. can't remember what it was. Maybe does the house have 4 chimneys, 2 cars, something? I don't know. They look the same. I think it was the letterbox. I think yeah, on the door. Yeah. I'm a monolingual. I can't see that sort of thing. But anyway, so Lucy finds this effect, and they want to publish this, and they say, I helped out with the data analysis and the design. But I don't believe it's real. Is my problem, because it just mechanistically seems unlikely that bilingualism is going to interact with kind of change blindness. So, it puts me in a difficult position here, and they end up saying, well, all right, put me on the paper, but you have to allow me to put paragraph in the discussion saying I don't believe the effect. And so we found a compromise, and there is the paragraph. Something like, if you're going to have these effects, you need to have a mechanistic account, either through which bilingualism produces enhancements to mechanisms that are also involved in visual spatial working memory, or bilinguals gain experience which separately enhance independent mechanisms of language processing and spatial working memory. Like, you've got to convince me the way that this is going to work, because we know there are these possible confounds out there which may be producing spurious findings. Okay. So this is really the problem, and it's not just with multilingualism, it's with any of these magic bullet approaches, that very often you do not have random allocation to condition. You have not said, I'll just recruit a big bunch of people, we'll toss a coin, half of you get to be multilinguals, half of you get to be monolinguals, so that you're likely to be similar in all other respects rather than the thing that I'm looking at, right? And that's true of, habitual action and video gameplay. These teenagers who play like 20 hours a week for 3 years, and then they have superior visual spatial attention. There may be other ways that they're different, and even where you have like training effect. Okay, I'll do random allocation, and you guys do 100 hours of video game practice, and you guys do 100 hours doesn't even catch the surface of what those teenagers are doing. So it could be there are sort of pre-existing differences, or like kids who successfully learn a musical instrument are often those who score high on conscientiousness to put in the practice, to not give up when the going gets tough, right? And I saw actually in a conference I was at the other week, someone reporting evidence about executive functions in kids who play team sports versus individual sports. And sort of wanting to infer that there was an advantage and an executive functions of playing team sports. But there could be other reasons that those kids differ, right? So broadly, there may be cognitive differences between the groups, but not for the reason you think, if you haven't got random allocation to condition, which is not possible or ethical in many of these important dimensions. Okay, so the kinds of confounds for multilingualism, well, yes, possible cognitive factors, but sociocultural factors, access to education, parental investment in the acquisition of language, and now you've read a book in English, you want to go to sleep, but I'm going to make you read a book in French as well before you go. This kind of interact. So a bunch of these things could be differing at the same time as language experience. All right, so now we're going to get to like a final couple of studies before we wrap up. This is like Return of the Jedi. This is where, with part 3, I come back in. And this is really because I'm now back in thinking about educational neuroscience and the relevance, translational relevance of a whole bunch of factors, of which multilingualism is one of those. Now we're going to be looking at adolescents here. It turned out that for other reasons, I was interacting with a big team building a longitudinal cohort study of adolescents in the UK. And adolescence, obviously educationally, really important phase. I know we're all supposed to focus on the first 1,000 days and early years and what, but the exams are being passed in adolescence, right, that are going to determine your future. And we still know that certainly high-level executive functions and non-verbal intelligence skills, those are still developing throughout the teenage years. So maybe this is a good place to look for the effects of multilingualism on cognition and probably more importantly on education. But ideally, I'm going to show you data from a longitudinal cohort that provides you two things. It provides you statistical power to potentially tease apart possible confounds, but also cross-sectional studies are most at risk of confounding if there's pre-existing correlations between different factors. Longitudinal studies give you a little bit of respite from that risk because you're looking at change within individuals rather than comparing across individuals. Okay, so this is the SCAMP cohort. Original data collection started, I think, 2015, something like that. These were kids that we tested when they were sort of between 11 and 13 and then did a 2-year follow-up. And we tested them, we gave them a big questionnaire, and we did cognitive tests. Now, the goal of this cohort study was actually to see whether mobile phones were melting their brains. That was a health concern at the time. So it was technology focused. As we were developing it, it was increasing age of smartphone usage and the emergence of social media. So it sort of branched out into the effect of smartphone usage, social media, mental health, these kind of issues. But we have a data set where we have longitudinal sort of 12 to 14 cognitive tests. And then afterwards, we can then go access their SAT scores, education of age 11, key stage 2, and then go access their GCSE results at age 16, key stage 4. Now, these individuals, they come from a London area. I showed you that stat early on that, you know, about half of everyone in London is multilingual. So we collected just straightforward information from them about, do you speak more than one language? Or is English your only language? When did you learn these further languages? And picking up also immigrants, people who came to the country where English wasn't their first language and they were picking it up when they arrived. So this is kind of the design. We're seeing 11 years of age, we're going to get SAT scores. So these are kind of tests and teacher assessments. And then in the middle, we have a kind of longitudinal 2-year follow-up on cognitive tests. And then we're going to come back and we have educational results. These are the cognitive tests that we're going to use. One of them here is called the trail finding, where it's a bunch of, I think in the top one, it's a bunch of circles that have numbers on them, but all the numbers are randomly distributed and you have to click 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the one below is letters of the alphabet and you have to go A, B, C, D. And then there's a switching condition where you have to go 1, A, 2, B, so on. So this is testing cognitive flexibility. Second test is backwards digit span. So you'll see 5, 9, 3, and then on the keypad, you'll have to do 3, 9, 5. The next one is a spatial working memory where the telephones are going to ring and it'll be one you haven't answered. So you have to answer them until you find the one that's ringing and then you put it down and you know it can't be that one again. So you have to store that location and then until you get through all the locations. And then we did just a matrices nonverbal intelligence test. Okay, so those are our cognitive tests, and we did 2 measures of that. These are all the languages that the individuals reported. So super diverse set of languages. It's not like, you know, my PhD where you do English, you do French, and we'll compare. Sort of real world, it is a sort of reasonably representative sample we're looking at. So I'm going to do an education paper and then finish off with the more complicated paper, which is still ongoing. It's this paper here that was published this year, just looking at educational outcomes. So we're looking at 3 linguistic groups, either multilingual learners, often described in the UK system as English as an additional language, simultaneous multilinguals who have acquired 2 or more languages since birth, and then English monolinguals. And we have an SCS distinction here. If we look at free school meals, which is linked to family income, of this sample of about 2,500, we have 615 of those on free school meals. Now, the whole cohort was 6,000 odd and is representative of the UK demographics. This is a subsample for whom we have all the data that we can put together for education. And this is what we found. So looking at the SATs exam, the year 11, so finishing off primary, we see it's Roberta can have stuff on this. Multilingual learners. So you're trying to do education in not your first language. And you can see those groups are showing lower in English, maths, and science. But the simultaneous multilinguals at that level, at that age, are performing as well as monolinguals. In math performance, the simultaneous multilinguals are slightly outperforming their peers. Now we're going to come back to GCSE, and we see two things. The multilingual learners have now caught up, and they are performing at the same level of monolinguals, and the simultaneous monolinguals have surpassed the monolingual students. Yes, so they were about the same level. Now they're doing better. So in both of those groups, you would say they haven't improved at a faster rate. For the multilingual learners, it's catch up to the same level of monolinguals. For the simultaneous monolinguals, it's going further. Okay, so this is Roberto's conclusion: long-term academic gains from early exposure to multiple languages. Here's a slide on socioeconomic impact. So free school meals, this shows kind of what you'd expect. So you do better if you're not on free school meals than on free school meals, and that kind of cuts across language experience. But there was some indication, so we're looking at the two shades of orange, not on free school meals or on free school meals, that you're seeing smaller differences in the multilingual groups than in the English monolinguals. Again, a suggestion that multilingualism is buffering some of the effects of differences in socioeconomic status. All right, so final study. This is still in preparation because I keep sending Rasheen away to run more analyses. But later on this summer, we should be submitting it. So that's language status again. This is self-reported. Our outcome measures the same, but now we're not just going to look at our education, 11 and 16, but we're going to include the cognition measures in the middle. And specifically here, what we're going to try and do is build in our potential confounds. So we're going to have socioeconomic status in there. That's going to be a combination of number of university educated parents, parental highest occupation, prestige, free school meal status, and area level deprivation. And then as our measure of or marker for cultural factors, we're going to have ethnicity. So what kind of cultural factors am I talking about here that might be influencing educational outcomes? Things like attitudes to education in the home, the amount of emphasis and parental investment and resources thrown at that, and kind of community support, kind of a diverse set of factors. The previous analyses were, I think, hierarchical linear modeling, but now we're going to go full structure and equation models with FIML estimation and robust standard errors. This is the kind of thing we're going to do. So I don't know if you're good with structural equation models. So we've got our predictor variables, simultaneous monolingual, multilingual learner, those guys. And then we have a kind of cultural predictor. And then we have socioeconomic status predictor. And what we're interested in predicting is either your cognitive skills or your educational attainment. Now, the circles here are because the round ones were latent factors. So you're pulling out the main dimensions of variability from your SES measures, from your cognitive skills, the 4 of them, and from your education, because your education is we're looking at maths, English, and science, but we want to pull out the common factor. So we're interested in the correlations between the predictors and cognitive skills and education. But then our key question is going to be, if you show an educational advantage, is it being mediated by better cognitive abilities? You know, when you do better in school because of multilingualism, is it because you've got better cognitive skills, at least as we're picking up with executive functions? Now, I've shown you that will be a cross-sectional model, looking for age 11 attainment, using our cognitive skills, the near one done age 12. That's a cross-sectional model. You could do that again for the GCSEs. So that's like one version, two cross-sectional models, or you can look at change between time 1 and time 2. So your sort of rate of growth. Now the cross-sectional models, those are going to be more vulnerable to confounds. Now, we've measured some of the potential confounds, but can't guarantee that there aren't more confounds out there. So the strongest evidence for me is going to be the longitudinal change. All right, so yes, talked about that. So just a correlation table, which is semi-undigested, but broadly what we're looking at is there's the SES factor, and you can see, so if it's bold, it's a reliable correlation. There's a correlation between SES factor and ethnicity. It's kind of what you expect. The SES is not evenly distributed across ethnic groups. There's a correlation between the SES factor and simultaneous monolinguals versus monolinguals. Sorry, simultaneous multilinguals versus monolinguals, and also between multilingual learners and monolinguals. And there's a correlation between language status and ethnicity. And then there's a correlation between SES and cognitive abilities, and there's a correlation between SES and educational abilities. There's a correlation, but look, guys, everything is correlating, and that means we now know we are maximally at risk of confounds. Yes, because if you don't balance your language status groups on SES or ethnicity, either of those factors are plenty able to come up with either cognitive differences or educational. So that just says all those meta-analyses and complaining papers out there, yeah, it's real. You can mess up here if you don't have properly balanced groups or if you don't control for confounding factors. Okay, I did get Roisin to do this. I sent her away to do it for the cognitive measures as well. That's why she's not talking to me. But this is just to say, in your regression models, you can have a look of your different predictors, either SES or the cultural factors or your language status. How much of the variability are they picking up? And you can see at age 11, it's mostly SES that's picking up the difference. Age 16, still mostly SES, but ethnicity is playing in more. Bilingual status, in fact, if anything, it's reduced. If you're looking at the change from time 1 to time 2, I'd say that pie chart quite impresses me. I don't normally see that amount of variance explained in a model. That is because we've got prior attainment, we've got age 11 performance in there as a predictor. But you can see in gains, the 3 different SES, cultural factors, language status are now kind of explaining equivalent amounts of growth over that period. Another user took control. Do you want to take over? All right. It's going way back. All right. All right. So this is the final, possibly the final data slide, if I remember, the meat and drink. Now, what I'm going to show you is, let's start off with this little guy here. This will be looking at, for simultaneous multilinguals, comparing them to monolinguals at time 1 education. Do we see an effect of language status here? Yeah. And this is the fully confounded model. We're not controlling for SES or ethnicity, and you can see there's nothing. But then what we do is actually we will now control for SES and ethnicity. And you can see in this case, actually, the confounds were making the effect look smaller. When you control for the confounds, now you are seeing that educational advantage at time 1. If you go back in, this is now to GCSE with the simultaneous bilinguals, we see it either in uncorrected or corrected models, a good, big educational advantage. That's kind of what we showed in the other study now with a different analytical method. This is looking at the increase, the change between 11 and 16. So this means gaps are widening if you see an effect there. And this is the acceleration of simultaneous multilinguals away from monolinguals. Now we'll go to cognition, and you can see you're finding robust cognitive advantages there. Oops, I said it wrong. Cognitive differences. It's educational advantages, cognitive differences, break my own rules. If you're now look at cognitive gains over that time, now you're not seeing an effect. What that means is whatever difference was present at 11, it's the same size difference. So I'm still umming and ahhing about there are 2 ways you can explain that. Either you say all of these cognitive advantages have happened by the age of 11, and then they don't change. You're still the same distance ahead. Or you're much more skeptical and you say, these are cross-sectional models that could have unmeasured confounds on. This is the most robust guy. The within child change is showing much smaller effects, which are not statistically reliable. Yeah. This blue star here is, we're now going to do a mediation analysis, the one I promised. Now you can do this on T1, T2, or change. So we're looking at any educational advantage. Is it mediated by any cognitive differences? We don't find that at time 1. We do find it at time 2. And when we dug in, what measure was it? It was working memory measures are mediating this. We don't find it in the longitudinal. Going down to multilingual learners, they are showing a disadvantage in education, which when you control for confounds gets smaller. No difference at GCSEs, control for confounds. Now they're actually showing an advantage. Education change, they are getting better faster than monolinguals. This is catch up. It looks like they've got a cognitive disadvantage, but actually when you control for the confounds, that goes away. And again, we don't see any difference in rate of change. And now, again, we had 3 opportunities to find mediation of educational differences by cognition, didn't find them. So we had 6 opportunities overall to find mediation effects, and only 1 showed a reliable effect. So you're probably thinking at the end of that, these educational advantages are not about cognition. It's mainly what looks like what's coming out of that. So I probably said all of that. Yeah, I think I said all of that going through it. So I will just wrap up with 3 conclusion slides. The narrow part harks back to the history, right? Which is multilingualism looks like it requires specific control processes and encounters representational challenges. You've got to build 2 lexicons, two grammar structures. You've got to be able to control them. But it is a dynamic, multi-dimensional phenomenon that people are changing, and they are diverse in multiple ways. If we go broad and we're looking at cognitive advantage, we're looking at educational implications, all those kind of ideas, we're at huge risk of confounds with both socioeconomic status and cultural factors. We know now, I can show you they're correlating with multilingual status, and they as well, those confounds show associations to cognition and education. Now, I showed you those longitudinal data, the rates of change, either in cognition or in education, and I said language status isn't doing anything. Yeah, the rates are now going up simultaneously. But we did run the analysis showing that the rates of change were affected by socioeconomic status and were affected by cultural factors. So it's not like we're not sensitive to those other influences. In the main, multilingual educational benefits are decoupled from cognitive benefits, at least for the cognitive skills we measured here. And the educational effects of multilingualism, therefore, should be considered separately from the narrow cognitive benefits. If you're getting broad, what's going on as a causal mechanistic story? My sense is there's lots of differences about what it means to be a multilingual, and it's multiple diffuse effects here. It's not just operating on selective attention. It's broader than that. I would see it as being similar to like the impact of socioeconomic status on cognition, or as I showed you on that paradox thing, the sort of diffuse effect that multiple educational experiences have on cognitive ability. Could be stuff like there's people who say it enhances being a multilingual, gives you sort of more environments, better creative capacities, more sort of social stimulation, broader cultural network, social network, enriching experiences. Not quite clear, but the sense is it's not narrow and cognitive. So final take homes. What would you say to a policymaker at this stage? There are educational advantages for being simultaneous multilingual and transient disadvantages for being a multilingual learner. The message would be support multilingualism. It's not bad. It's not going to bite you. English is an additional language, probably shouldn't be in your tables alongside free school meals. It's an opportunity, not an affliction. But you might conclude from these data that if the causality is indeed diffuse, just forcing English native monolinguals to learn a modern language in school may not be enough to confer some of those wider benefits if it's coming from the sort of wraparound cultural and social effects. All right. Thanks to all the people who contributed to that and the funders. And any questions? Very well.
Do you want to ask it?
Yeah, I can do that.
yeah.
Oh, hi, Michael. It's a fantastic paper. I really enjoyed this. It shows the importance of having these big projects where you can actually look into so many different variables. And I particularly like the fact that you are so open about potential confounds, right? Let's not jump to conclusions and say we have a hypothesis and hooray, it's been confirmed, but rather actually exploring all the potential confounds. So my first question would be about this very basic thing about chicken and egg, right? Is there a possibility, right, that those that are doing better on the cognitive tasks were simply better at some form of cognition right from the start, therefore able to become better bilinguals and then experience all those differences, right? So I think it's you mentioned the difficulty of causality in your final conclusion. So what is your take on this issue of the chicken and the egg here?
So I'm going to come down on, I think, mainly chicken rather than egg. Yeah, so I think the simultaneous simultaneous multilinguals are in that group because of the families and the cultures that they grow up in. And I don't think we're going to see many kids there who grew up in multilingual environments and came out as monolinguals because they couldn't cut it because of their cognitive skills. I think, even kids with special educational needs and disabilities, if you immerse them from the early years in multilingual environments, they can grow up monolingual. I mean, sure, they might have slower naming times and a smaller vocabulary, but that early immersion, I don't think cognition is a sort of gatekeeper to becoming a simultaneous multilingual. I think that could be more the case. If you look at who's a multilingual learner has multiple languages but didn't grow up with both of them at university, you're probably only going to look at a subsample now who had the ability to learn a second language in school. So I think it may depend on the group you're looking at and what age you're looking at them. But the simultaneous multilinguals, I think you're looking more at a social effect there than a cognitive.
Okay. Can I ask one more question? That is I don't know whether I missed it, but I didn't see any measurements of vocabulary size in your study. Now, Ellen Bialystok did a study among 1,000 or 2,000 bilinguals at all ages. And at all ages, you see that these bilinguals have a smaller vocabulary in English, they're L2. So I wonder, if you compare your simultaneous bilinguals with these multilingual learners, for example, whether the difference between those two isn't reducible to the size of their vocabulary in English. So would that be one of those confounds that would really need to be controlled for, particularly with school success, right? Because it's well known from a range of studies that the larger your vocabulary, the better you're going to do in schools. There's now also, yet again, I've reviewed a paper which shows that in higher education, that also plays a big role, right? How large is your vocabulary? As an overseas student, you haven't got that kind of vocabulary, and you're then at risk of not getting these high marks. And it's been shown at lower levels of education in the same way. So I wonder whether that would be something that you would be interested in looking at.
Yeah, so as always, you want more data, more data available for your cohort. As you can see, this was kind of a repurposed cohort. So we indeed struggle to look at language. You have to bear in mind how we collected these data was we had 1 hour of these individuals in their science IT class where they get to sit down in front of a computer, and we had to get them to do all of those cognitive tasks and a questionnaire. So we were always fighting against what data we could collect. We did want to look at their language ability. Now, at the time, that's because teenagers were, at least some of them were holding the phones next to their head. Now it's mainly like old people who are doing that, like me, but like kids now, we're on their thumbs, right? And if you generally had a concern that electromagnetic radiation emissions were affecting the brain, you would want to look at the lobe that's right next to the phone, right? Which is a temporal lobe. So we did want to have language measures. It's actually harder to get language measures in teenagers that are still showing developmental sensitivity. Vocabulary size, I don't know, is there like a CDI or something for teenagers? Like how many of these 100,000 words do you know? Tick all the ones you know. Well, we ended up doing speech in noise, which was something we could do. It was a bit of a difficult thing to do because it depends on how good the headphones are that you're in a particular IT booth. So we collected that language measure, but the only other language measure we could really access was we had some online software that was delivering like task instructions or questions, and then you have to go on to the next page. Was some kind of measure of how quickly they read like a page of instructions. I haven't looked at what we've done with that, but it's a kind of measure that shows high correlations to all of our other measures. You don't get a lot of unique variance in these measures, but I absolutely agree with you. I think vocabulary size could be one of the reasons that you're seeing the multilingual learners have that initial educational disadvantage, and what explains their catch-up.
Well, thank you very much.
But it's not going to have vocabulary size in it.
But it would have some sort of proxy.
We have fished around in a proxy. You do have to pre-specify with the MPD exactly what fields you want of them rather than anything possible. But of course, the cognitive measures where we are seeing differences, I think it's interesting with the multilingual learners, they're all non-linguistic, right? They don't require language in order to do them. And then we are seeing these disadvantages that go away when we control for some of the confounds. So I think that will probably fit better with your story, that some of the educational disadvantage is just kind of language based, that you don't have automaticity and speed with the language and of the material that you're being presented, and then that goes away with experience. Yeah.
Just in terms of the sort of demographic backgrounds of these three different groups? Were there just raw differences between the groups in the distribution of sort of SES and the spread? How different were the groups?
It is something I need to look at. I mean, obviously that is contained in the correlation matrix, and fishing that out. So you're going to get the whole sample was demographically representative. And it's certainly the first subsample for the educational results, which was 2,500, was still representative. I'm just having Rasheen go back through because we had to take a smaller subsample of about whatever it was, 1,800, because now you had to have at least 4 measurement points. So we're finding, for example, Black ethnicity is going to be associated with lower SES and lower educational outcomes. And in the end, we reduced our ethnicity metric to, were you Asian or not? Because Asian families were showing big advantages. And then they were showing higher SES as well. So whole sample representative, probably.
Yeah.
But you're seeing these predetermined correlations within the data.
Were you thinking about the two multilingual groups?
Yeah,
Because
one is just more
yeah, well, which is what you were
advantage,
suggesting, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So is it just that the simultaneous bilinguals are these kind of really privileged, coming from these kind of privileged
Just more privilege,
backgrounds? But then, you know, you're controlling for that statistically. But so
I'm trying to show, I got Rasheen, I said, oh, it's a nice result, but can we put a version of the analyses which are maximally confounded, where you don't put in SES? And so I tried to have that, and then now we'll put them in and control for them. So you're controlling for that variance and then seeing what's left, and then to contrast them. So that's what you're seeing on that graph. So that those two graphs, every bar chart was a different structural equation model. So, you know, it's iteration. So that's like 30 models to run that. And then I want her to break it down, just be thorough. Can we not have a whole cognitive thing, but break it down by cognitive subtests to see whether it, and then can we not have overall ability? Can we break it down by English, maths and science to see whether maybe there's specific effects for working memory in science? But redoing that whole design 12 times, as
Amazing data.
Rasheen's upset with me.
anyway, we better, because people are dropping like flies now, aren't they?
Yeah, it's dropping like flies. Thanks so much, everyone online, sticking with me. It's been a pleasure.
Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for a really fascinating talk.
Thank you.
Did